All right, let's check in with the listeners.
Hey, listeners.
Hey, listeners.
Greetings, listeners.
Listeners, remember you can always reach us at the email address gamescoop@ign.com, just like Chris did from Saskatoon.
Saskatoon.
Where's that?
Good old Saskatoon.
Sounds like, is it Canada?
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Maybe?
I'm guessing
Burma.
Burma. Well, you may know it as Burma, but it'll always be, no, Myanmar. Now it's Myanmar, but it'll always be Burma to me. That's a Petermanism, right? Yeah.
Anyway, he has a great question, a big question, but also a straight and to the point question. What is the golden age of video games?
Oh, this is so good.
This one, huh?
This
one. Well,
I would.
So there isn't some great. It depends on how long you consider an age.
Can I say this first of all?
Please.
A golden age is defined as a period in a field of endeavor when great tasks were accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind,
Yeah.
what is the golden age of video games?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's crazy, right? Because you can anyone can make a totally valid argument for almost any of the eras.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'll say this. I feel like things are a little bit dicier when we're just getting started with a big transition in technology. Like the PS1 N64 era is when I'd played video games my whole life, but that was when I'm like, this is gonna be my life.
Yeah.
I love this hobby, but there's no denying that in hindsight, like those games are really blocky and clunky. And then it was the next generation, the second generation of 3D, where like incredible feats were achieved.
Yeah.
And I would make the same argument for the 8-bit era.
Yeah, it's important not to let nostalgia and your beloved childhood memories determine what is the golden age.
My earliest memories of video games are with the NES, but I don't think those games aged as well as the SNES and Genesis games. So for me, the golden age is roughly 1990 to 95. That 16-bit.
That 16-bit era.
Yeah. Super Mario World, Link to the Past,
Super Metroid,
which is my favorite game of all time. And the speed of stuff like Sonic, even though that gameplay didn't hold up. I'd never experienced anything like that at that time. Final Fantasy VI, all those RPGs, Chrono Trigger, you can go on and on and on and on.
To counterpoint that, I think everything you're saying here is absolutely valid. However, one of the virtues of 8-bit games and first-generation 3D games is raw experimentation. They are much rougher around the edges, and some of them are harder to go back to, but people are always trying new things. They were inventing new things constantly, and that's one of the things I love about that age. So I'm going to, you didn't give us a window of time, so I'm going to say about 1989, 90 to about 2000. From the end of the NES era, when you got the
decade.
Yeah, the peak of the NES era, when you get the best, most polished NES games coming out, when they'd really mastered the sucker, and they were doing all kinds of neat stuff, and you still had, and I can cheat. I can still go to the store in 1990 and buy Bionic Commando, which was made a couple of years before. So that's okay. But I can go and grab things from the end of that 8-bit era, and then all the way through the beautiful SNES polish era, into the PlayStation when the optical media made things cheap and when development was much easier than it was during the assembly language era, and people could try all kinds of crazy stuff and release it for $40. And finally, I get to hook on the very end of that and get the Dreamcast, which was one of the best 18-month gaming experiments ever. So from I'd say pretty much everything, maybe I'm going to push it up to the late 80s and get Mega Man 2 and Bionic Commando in there. And
you're getting pretty greedy.
I am getting
with
pretty
your golden age.
Okay, I am getting pretty greedy. Well, but think about, so the history of video games is what, 1972, 3, some of that up to now, that's what, a 40-some-year window? So
and you're trying to cover...
I'm thinking a quarter of it.
Yeah, a quarter of all the video game history is the
Now, I asked you about this before the show, and you said it was okay.
I'm not. I said it...
whatever.
There are no bars held.
Yeah.
It's whatever you think. I'm just saying.
I like the experimental nature of that age.
There is something to be said for optical media and games coming on CD really letting people go kind of crazy.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of digital distribution at the time, so now we're seeing that again, where you can release whatever you want. If it sells 500 copies, but you made it in your basement, fine. And that was like the precursor to that. You would get weird PS1 games. For the first time ever, a game didn't need to sell, a tremendous number of copies to make its money back from the cart that was printed. So, just like, I don't know, stuff like Parappa the Rapper or Intelligent Cube, or I don't even know.
Bushido Blade or Einhander, or, there's just all kinds of crazy things came out during that period.
I love that Square Enix released a 2D shoot-'em-up on consoles
that's still good.
at retail.
That's still
really
That's one of the best shooters of all time.
And then you also, in that period, you get the Sega Saturn era. That thing was a Frankensteinian monstrosity, but it had so many good games on it. And then you get all that wonderful weirdness for the weird consoles that popped up and died in that period, but all of them had 2 or 3 really interesting gems on them. You had things like Return Fire or the Tempest remake for the Jaguar. These are really good games too.
Yeah,
And it's possibly the last golden age of
3DO 's in
importing
there.
too.
Yeah, and then on top of that, Golden Age. There's an amazing
It's
Golden
an
Age.
amazing time to
Yeah, such
import.
a good point.
So,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Vince, what's your?
Yeah, what would you say is the golden age of video games?
No, actually, Jared stole my thunder. I was gonna say like 90 to 2000. Like that to me is the like you said, you're getting the last few great NES games trickling in. That's the entirety of the 16-bit era, which to me is like pound for pound. That's the greatest. That is the greatest console generation. Is the 16-bit era.
Yeah.
It is the best versions of all the classic franchises that started in the 80s. And then you also have the N64 had some revelatory titles, which, what we said, haven't all necessarily aged wonderfully. And then like mid and the late 90s, some of the stuff that came out on PS1 was just next level revelatory stuff like, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Metal Gear Solid, stuff like Final Fantasy VII.
Also,
massive achievements.
Also, we're completely ignoring PCs here. That era for PCs was the golden age. I don't think there's any question there. This is the era of Civ and Civ 2 and Doom and Quake. And I mean, this is when PCs ruled the universe. Half-Life.
Baldur's Gate sneaks in.
Yeah, exactly.
Baldur's Gate.
Some of the great Apex RPGs released during that period. Yeah, it's so good.
All right, so you're all sort of like in the era. You said like the first half of the 90s, and then both of you tend to agree it's that whole decade. Let me put this out there. I think maybe the last generation, the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Wii generation, because that was the first time in a long time I was seeing new big AAA games that were taking video games to new places, doing things I had never seen before. In that generation, we get Mass Effect, BioShock, Portal, Mario Galaxy, Uncharted 2, the Arkham games, Skyrim, Fallout 3, Red Dead Redemption, The Last of Us, Rock Band, and Guitar Hero. All this amazing AAA stuff. And then you also, in that generation, saw the rise of indie games, and alongside that we're playing Limbo and Super Meat Boy and Pac-Man Championship Edition DX, Braid, Walking Dead, Trials, Mark of the Ninja, Geometry Wars, Fez, Peggle, Joe Danger.
Yeah.
Then there's also the Wii doing something totally different and creating this entire new demographic of gamers, more casual gamers, introducing motion controls, and that same period saw the rise of mobile gaming and on iPhones and Android devices, which was like, that was a very exciting time. There's a different way to interact with games, new input, all sorts of new ideas they're playing with.
You convinced me.
So yeah, just think about all that.
No, that's an amazing era.
I think unfortunately that might be over, because now today there's no more mid-tier game level, fewer AAA games, and now most releases are big, are indie game releases. And there's no more Wii. There's no more of that casual market. It's gone. The Wii U is a failure. And then mobile gaming the well has kind of been poisoned by free to play.
Yeah, I think that it's an extraordinarily valid point. I would not argue against you on that. It was a ridiculously rich era for innovation in games, and I think especially when XBLA changed the world. I mean, it just from Braid on, from our world. Yeah, it changed. It put things into people's hands. A kind of game that seemed to be completely dead. It was a pretty wonderful thing. But yeah, you listed off some extraordinary evolutions on ideas that were planted in that classic era. So I have no argument against that.
I think my issue with last generation, everything you said is super true, right? It's an incredible generation, and I've talked before on GameScoop about that combination of small and large both being able to grow and thrive is really fun and powerful. But it was the start. We saw the kernel of things that are creating problems for us today.
The horse armor.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. That generation brought us horse armor.
That's a really good point too.
And that's just the continuation of. I mean, games have always
annualized games.
Yeah, I don't have any illusions about video games not being about making money in the 80s and 90s. Obviously, they were, but I feel like we have the tail wagging the dog now in terms of let's have a 10-year plan for monetizing our product, and let's try to get the revenue per user as high as we can, and the purity of gameplay of just let's make a really great product, and then people want to spend $40 or $50 or $60 for it is gone.
Yeah,
I don't think it's probably ever coming back. Early access is kind of okay, but even that's kind of troublesome now in a lot of ways.
No, that's a lot of valid arguments. Also, to go into an old horse I like to beat. When you bought a console between 1990 and 2000, you were reasonably assured that it would work
That's another kernel
whereupon
of an
during that
idea,
last
yeah.
generation, how many Xboxes survived
That's
from
true.
those dark days?
Yeah,
and
that's
it,
true.
it was ridiculous.
Oh, I thought you were going in the direction of just console updates and hard
Oh, I
software.
was
I mean,
going there.
this-
that
Like,
was
I
coming
can't-
next.
I had
PS3
two or
updates.
three of my Xboxes. I had to send back and have.
Yeah, the Red Ring of Death,
Yeah.
but also just sitting there and be like, time for a PS3 update.
It's
Want to
such a
play my new
joke.
game?
It's such
Yeah.
a joke,
You
but it's
know?
not a joke. It was like 9 p.m. one evening, and I'm like, I'm gonna play Arkham Knight, and I'm like, nope, I just can't play video games tonight. And, you're like, and that's part of why I actually play
Yeah.
a lot on iPad now, because I pick up You Must Build a Boat while I'm waiting my Xbox One to update, and I'm like, well, this is really fun. So
Yeah, I'm following this little project right now. There's a group of guys that have gotten together to create a kind of a hobbyist home game platform that's going to be designed to be written for largely, I think, that kind of assembly language construction.
It's not called Yuya, is it?
No, it's not. No, this is not meant to be a mass market product. It's very much a boutique thing. But the idea is to create like a locked platform for hobbyists to make small market games.
Sure.
I'm really interested in that kind of little boutique niche to see. That will never be a big thing. Oh, the boutique niche.
Justin and I may have discussed something similar in the past. Anyway,
Oh, really? Is this Playdia all over again?
No. So Damon, I ran the numbers on these console updates, and if this trend continues, we'll be spending 1,000 hours a day updating our consoles in the next decade.
1,000 hours a day. See, that's surprising. I didn't even realize that there were that many hours in a day.
If the line continues in the direction that it's going,
1,000 hours a day.
Yep.
Wow. Well,
Yeah, so those are all really good points.
I think the main thing, my takeaway is that right now, I don't think that creatively or in terms of quality, we're in any worse of a place now than we were last generation.
Yeah.
I think the big thing is like you said, we're beginning to see the seed that was planted grow into this tangle of vines that's threatening to start strangling creativity. But I feel like there's still time for us to. I think what needs to happen is
it's the suits, man.
it's the man. Like, but I think once it's going to take some time. It's going to take diligence on the part of game fans and consumers voting properly with their dollars, and it's going to take some forward-thinking executives to think about what's the right thing for the future and the long-term growth of the industry, and hence their paycheck. But I think once we figure out the way to do business in a way that's good for developers, that's good for retailers, that's good for consumers, and that's good for developers and publishers, I think once that all gets figured out, I think it's going to be another golden age for sure. How long that'll take, I don't know.
Yeah, it's true. I like to read old books, and it's fun. You read them, and they'll start talking about like the good old days of games in old books about games. It's great. You go back, you're like, you go into an arcade between 1980 and 84. You'd have thought that was the golden age of video games.
You can make an argument for the early '80s being the golden age.
I mean, an arcade in those 5 years would have just been the most
There is,
amazing place
I
in the
think
world to be.
there is a pretty clear golden age for arcade games being in the early 80s. I think that's pretty
Gosh,
cool. But viewers and listeners, what do you think is the golden age of video games? If you're watching this video, let us know in the comments. If you're listening to the podcast, email us at gamescoop@ign.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Can people watching the video email you?
Yeah, sure, they can do that too. And then the people listening can also go to the video and comment on it.
That's awesome! Crazy!
It's freaking amazing.